It's a miracle. Multiple medical researchers documented her case, and it's been published in a peer-reviewed medical journal.
God's story, your life. Unfolding short stories.
Have you ever heard of Lee Strobel? He used to be an atheist, but when his wife became a Christian, he used his background as the legal editor at the Chicago Tribune to set out to disprove her new belief. Lee approached Christianity like a case to be examined, interviewing experts and weighing evidence. But instead of building a case against Christ, that investigation became the best-selling book and eventual film, The Case for Christ. Today, Lee has a new movie in theaters. The Case for Miracles runs December 15th through 18th. And for Unfolding Short Stories, Lee shares 3 real-life accounts that invite us to ask, do miracles still happen today?
One of the favorite miracles we talk about in our movie, The Case for Miracles, involves a woman who was blind for 12 years. She had an incurable condition called juvenile macular degeneration. Nobody gets cured of that. She went to a school for the blind. She learned how to read Braille. She walked with a white cane. And she ended up marrying a Baptist pastor. So one night, they're getting ready to go to bed. And she's in bed. He comes over and he puts his hand on her shoulder and he begins to cry. And he begins to pray, and he says, Lord, I know you can heal my wife. I know you can do it. And Lord, I pray you do it tonight. And with that, she opened her eyes to perfect eyesight. She saw her husband for the first time. She said, after years of darkness, all of a sudden, I could see perfectly. It's a miracle. And indeed, I think it is a miracle. Multiple medical researchers documented her case, and it's been published in a peer-reviewed medical journal. This is not just a story you read on the internet. It's not just something you hear whispered in the hallway of a church. This is a documented case. And by the way, her eyesight remained for the rest of her life. She lived more than another 50 years and continued to enjoy good eyesight. What do you do with that? What do you do? How do you account for the timing that it happens right after a prayer to Jesus? How do you account for the fact that you can comb the medical literature from A to Z and you won't find any other case of anybody being spontaneously healed of this otherwise incurable condition? So that miracle opened my eyes even wider than they had been toward the reality that God exists and he's still involved in the miracle business today.
Well, after hearing the story of a woman who regained her sight, Lee continued digging. And what he found next was a case that began at birth.
One of my favorite stories about a documented miracle is one that got cut from our movie. I mean, at some point, you can't put everything in the movie, and this one ended up on the cutting room floor, and it disappointed me because it's a powerful, well-documented case of a medical healing that has no natural explanation. And it's a story about a guy named Chris. I've gotten to know Chris. He lives in Texas, and Chris was born with a paralyzed stomach. It's a condition called gastroparesis. And when you have a 100% paralyzed stomach at birth, it ain't going to be healed. I mean, that's your condition for life. Every time they tried to feed this infant, he would throw it up. He couldn't keep food down. So they had to install tubes in his abdomen so that food could be fed directly into his intestine. And he lived that way for the first 16 years of his life. He couldn't take in food and swallow it and digest it like a normal person would. He had to feed himself formula through these tubes in his abdomen. Well, he got to be the age of 16, and his parents one day took him to a church. And the pastor gets up and he tells a story of how God had healed him. And so Chris's parents brought up Chris to the pastor, and said, hey, would you pray that God would heal our son? He has this condition, it's incurable, and it's a bother to him. He can't have a normal life. And so the pastor put his hand on Chris's shoulder and began to pray. And Chris said, as soon as he began to pray, it was like an electric shock went through my body, like diagonally through my body, and instantly healed his paralyzed stomach. To the degree he knew it was healed immediately. He went out that day, and get this, he went to a Chinese restaurant and had his first meal where he's eating Asian food and enjoying it and tasting it and digesting it. He goes to the doctor. They say, this is medically impossible, but you're perfectly normal. You've been healed. And they actually did the surgery to remove those tubes from his abdomen. And in fact, during our interview, he pulled up his shirt and you could see the scars from where the surgeons had gone in and removed the tubes that he had been fed for those so many years. Now, this is a case, again, researched by multiple medical researchers and published in a peer-reviewed medical journal. It's a well-documented case. You know, to me, if four things are true, you can conclude that a miracle has taken place. Number one, do you have solid medical documentation? Number two, do you have testimony by multiple eyewitnesses who have no motive to deceive? Number three, is there no natural explanation of what took place? And number four, did it take place in the context of prayer? And we have those conditions here and in all these other cases that we talk about in our movie, The Case for Miracles.
The next story we have for you is about a woman named Barbara. Her story unfolds over decades. Barbara's body was slowly shutting down until an unexpected moment changed everything.
One of the cases of miracles that I personally helped investigate is one that absolutely blew my mind and increased my faith. It's a woman whose name was Barbara Comiskey. Her married name was Snyder later. And Barbara, as a teenager, came down with multiple sclerosis. She was diagnosed, we have the documents, diagnosed at the Mayo Clinic. And she deteriorated very quickly after that. Multiple hospitalizations, multiple surgeries. And after many years this way, she hadn't walked in 7 years, they got together with her parents and said, hey, there's nothing we can do. Let's put her in hospice. Next time she gets pneumonia, which she would get periodically, we're just going to let her die. We're only prolonging the inevitable. She's terminally ill. And so they put her in hospice in her home. She's in her bed. She's curled up like a pretzel. Rigidly, her fingers are curled so they're touching her wrists. Her feet are rigidly extended. She hadn't walked in 7 years, and so her legs had atrophied. She had a tube in her throat that was connected to oxygen canisters in the garage so she could breathe. One lung was collapsed. The other one was at 50%. She had lost control of her urination and bowels. She was virtually blind by then. She could see gray shapes. And she's waiting to die. Well, somebody said, hey, there's a Christian radio station here in Chicago called WMBI, the Moody Bible Institute. Let's tell them to pray for her. Let's put out the word. What can it hurt? And so they went on the radio station. They said, hey, would you all pray for Barbara? She's on her deathbed. She's in hospice. She was described by her doctor as one of the most hopelessly ill patients he had ever seen. Would you pray for her? Well, we documented that at least 450 people began to pray for Barbara. How do we know? Because they sent letters saying, Barbara, I'm praying for you. Well, it came to Pentecost Sunday. And she had a couple of friends in her room where she was dying, curled up. And they were reading her some of the letters from people who had written in saying they're praying for her to try to encourage her. And in the middle of that, from the corner of the room where nobody was, Barbara heard the voice of God. And the voice said, my child, get up and walk. So she's stunned by this. So she rips the tube out from her throat so she could talk. And she says, hey, I don't know what you guys are going to think of this. God just told me to get up and walk. Go find my parents. I want them to be here for this. So they run off to get her parents, but she couldn't wait. She jumped out of bed. And I said, Barbara, what was that like when you jumped out of bed? She said, Lee, it was the funniest thing. First thing I noticed, my feet were flat on the floor. My feet had not been anything but rigidly extended for 7 years, and yet they were flat on the floor. Second thing I noticed, my hands had come uncurled. They had been rigidly, my fingers were touching my wrists, and they were, and then she said, she laughed. She said, the third thing I noticed, I could see. She said, you'd think that'd be the first thing I noticed. That was the third thing I noticed, that my eyesight had returned. She had been instantly healed, 100% of the effects of multiple sclerosis. Her lungs were inflated again. Get this, her mother comes into the room and falls down on her knees and grabs Barbara's calves and said, your muscle tone has come back. Her father comes in, they start to waltz around her bedroom. Well, it was Pentecost Sunday. And they said, let's go to church. They went to Wheaton Wesleyan Church in Wheaton, Illinois. Said, let's go to church to thank God what he has done. This is miraculous. So they show up at the church. The service had already started. And as they came in the back, the door of the church, the pastor was up front and he said, does anybody have any announcements? And Barbara starts walking down the center aisle. Nobody had seen Barbara out of a wheelchair for 7 years. The place erupts with people singing, Amazing Grace, I once was blind and now I see. The next day, Barbara goes to one of her doctors to be examined. And he said later, I saw her walking down the corridor toward my office, and my first thought was, oh, she died, and that's a ghost. Because he said, this is medically impossible. And it is. It's medically impossible. And yet it happened to sweet Barbara. She ended up marrying a pastor, and the rest of their lives, they ministered at a little Wesleyan church in Fredericksburg, Virginia, telling other people about the power of God. I hear that, and I met her, and this is years later. This healing happened in the 1980s, and I interviewed her just a few years ago. And to hear her tell it, she looks with this sense of awe and wonder as she describes what took place. And, usually I try to compensate people when I take their time and tell their story in a movie. I try to give them a check and something, a little something to thank them for their time and effort and so forth. She would not accept it. She said, no. God did this in my life. I can't take anything for this.
For Lee Strobel, calling something a miracle isn't casual. He asks 4 questions. Is there medical documentation? Are there credible eyewitnesses? Is there no natural explanation? And did it happen in the context of prayer? Those questions frame every story you heard today. They also shape Lee's film, The Case for Miracles, which is in theaters, December 15th through 18th. If you want to learn more about that movie or the book, Case for Miracles, you can find a link in today's show notes. Well, The Unfolding is a faith podcast. And if you want to hear more podcasts like it, just go to myfaithpodcasts.com.